Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Everybody sing it with me. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one, no. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. One more time. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one, no. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
Thank you, Bilbo.
Thank you, guys. Well, good morning and happy Martin Luther King Day. Martin Luther King was born on this day, January 15th in 1929. He came of age in the South during a time when racial discrimination was the law of the land. Black Americans risked jail time for accessing public accommodations like drinking fountains, parks, restaurants, hotels. Their voting rights were denied by complicated, onerous, and discriminatory rules. And even if they attempted to register to vote, they could be fired from their jobs, run off their farms, or face vigilante violence. But along came a minister who had a vision of a different future that he called the beloved community. For Martin Luther King realized something early on that it would take many of us longer to realize, that we are one community on this earth. We may be many colors, we may be many cultures, but we are one community. And he imagined a beloved community, a community where everyone, as he put it, was judged not for the color of their skin, but for the content of their character. Now, to build this community would require a shift in how we view one another. And that cannot happen until we shift how we view ourselves, how we deal with our grievances, and how we develop the ability to see the interconnectedness amongst all of us. It's a big job. And for a while, it seemed that we were making progress, and we had, slower than we would have desired, but progress nonetheless. And then beginning about 8-10 years ago, it looked like it was all beginning to come undone, like much of what we had accomplished was being attacked and dismantled. Now, we could blame it on politics, but politics is a reflection of the ascendant consciousness of the society in which it is in. So what happened? And more importantly, how do we get back on track? How do we, in unity, using our unity principles, revive and carry forward the dream and the vision of Martin Luther King, Jr.? Now, in many churches today, they will be quoting from the I Have a Dream speech, one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s most famous and most powerful speeches. But I was led by Ben, thank you, Ben, to a lecture he gave, a lecture that I think speaks to a deeper meaning, a deeper call to action. In 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And as is the custom, he gave the acceptance speech, and then the next evening he lectured the Nobel Academy and the invited guests. And he summed up the challenge and articulated the reasons why the problems that his people were facing were still going on. And you know what? They are still going on today. And the articulation of the problems and challenges is just as true today as it was in 1964. So let me begin by sharing some of what he said. I quote, "This evening I would like to use this lofty and historic platform to discuss what appears to me the most pressing problem confronting humankind." And remember, I'm going to read it the way he wrote it. Remember, this was 1964. "Modern man has brought the whole world to an awe-inspiring threshold of the future. He has reached new and astonishing peaks of scientific success. He has produced machines that think and instruments that peer into the unimaginable ranges of the universe. He has built gigantic bridges to span the seas and gargantuan buildings that kiss the skies. His airplanes and spaceships have dwarfed distance and placed time in chains and carved highways through the stratosphere. This is a dazzling picture of modern man's scientific and technological process. And yet, in spite of these spectacular strides in science and technology, and still unlimited ones to come, something basic is missing. There is a sort of poverty of the spirit which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple art of living together as brothers and sisters. "60 years ago almost. And still this is too true. We still find ourselves trying to understand this, trying to understand each other, and also not wanting to make the effort to understand one another. For we're right? No. No, we are all still growing, still learning, still developing, but it is very easy to be complacent. It is very easy to sit in our experience of life and say, things aren't so bad. This is comfortable. It's easy to maintain the status quo. But the price we pay as human beings is much too high for that comfort. For the truth is, not one single person on this planet is free until we are all free. No one is equal until we are all equal. Martin Luther King understood this. His message, while largely about racial equality for his people, also embraced all people. He recognized that prejudice hurts everyone, not just the ones who are on the receiving end, but the ones who are on the giving end. Much like Jesus recognized what the Roman soldiers were doing to themselves when they were crucifying him. He said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And he meant they don't know what they are doing to themselves. Because we are one. Martin Luther King understood that. And he used his gift of understanding to reach people of all races around the world. I was blessed to be a child when Martin Luther King was still alive. And I remember sitting in my grandparents' house, and they had him on the radio, and we're listening to him and discussing his speeches. Now, I was a young child, maybe 6, 7 years old. I don't remember exactly everything they said. I don't think that I probably understood exactly what Martin Luther King was saying at the time, but it touched me. First of all, because of the power of his words, the power that he put in his teachings. But also because even at that young age, I began to hear a truth that was not common in the culture I grew up in. I was born outside of Chicago in a white middle-class neighborhood, suburbia, the post-war generation. We had it good. There was no black person in our neighborhood. It was a very white neighborhood. Until one day down the street, a family moved in that was of color. And I remember they had a daughter, her name was Dawn, who was the same age as my sister. And we all played together in those days in the neighborhood. We didn't have all the Xboxes and stuff. And up until we started school, it was okay to be friends with Dawn. And then we started school, and something happened. My sister was no longer allowed to play with her because what would the neighbors think? This is the reality of that time and place. And sometimes, in some places, still the reality today. I remember when I was 11 years old and I joined Boy Scouts. And if you know anything about Boy Scouts, you're put into a patrol. And my patrol leader, his name was Monroe, was black. He was my hero. I mean, this guy knew what I wanted to know. He knew how to camp. He knew how to work with the animals. He was 17 or 18. I was 11. And then all of a sudden, my parents pulled me out of the troop and put me in another troop. And it was not until some years later that I realized they put me in a troop that was all white. Now, they told me it was because it was closer. Well, after I got my driver's license, I thought, I'm going to check this out. And it was actually 3/4 of a mile further. Now, I don't blame my parents. They thought they were doing the best they could for their children. I understand that. But the idea of rights and wrongs is subjective to the consciousness of those who determine what is right and what is wrong. The ideas of who is better than others, or that we are all equal, is determined by the consciousness of those who hold those ideas. And that is often the result of the dominant culture of the time and place, or the messages we grow up with. This is what Martin Luther King saw, and he strove to shift the thinking of the dominant culture. I watched my grandparents listen to him day after day after day on the radio and discuss this, and I watched them begin to change their thinking, their view of people who were different from who they were. Now, they were born in the Missouri, Kansas area in the late 1800s, early 1900s, an area that was and still is very prejudiced. And yet they changed. Now, by our standards today, maybe not as much as they could have, but by the standards of their time, they made a huge shift. Sadly, and I don't know why, their children did not, but their grandchildren did. Martin Luther King was able to reach them and us because he knew how to convey his vision in a way that people could hear. And that's the important part, to hear. Because when we can hear, when we can speak to one another in ways that we can hear, and more importantly, when we listen and hear, we can be changed at depth. Where does unity fit into all of this? I wish I could say that unity was always on the cutting edge of equality and civil rights, but alas, I cannot. You know, one of our core values in unity now is authenticity. It actually has been for a while. And so one of the things that we have going for us, I think, is that we do not deny our history, although there was a time when we did, but we look with honest eyes so that we may learn from our mistakes. One of the primary teachings of unity is that being aware of spiritual principles is not enough. We have to take action. Charles Fillmore said, resting in faith that all people are divine and made in God's image is not the same as taking purposeful steps to ensure that all are treated equally and fairly. Both are necessary, belief and action. And by the way, Charles Fillmore was a product of his time and his cultures, as enlightened as he was. He had to deal with a lot of this too, and some of it he dealt with successfully, and some of it not so much. For in 1964, as Martin Luther King was making his speeches and presenting his lectures, it was only the second year in Unity history that black children were allowed to swim in the Unity Village pool. And while it was true that Unity said they would admit black ministerial applicants to the school as far back as 1934, if they applied, they were not allowed to live on Unity Village grounds until 1956. It was Missouri. But they could have stood up and said, no, we will be different. And thanks to the courage and determination of some of our early Unity ministers, such as Johnny Coleman and Ruth Mosley and others who founded the Unity Urban School, things changed. They had the courage to say, this is not right. We are one. We are unity. It's time we started living it. Today, of course, we look different. We think differently. But it was not without a lot of effort and struggle. We have a new understanding. And more importantly, we now make it part of our mission to seek greater understanding. We are wise enough to know that we're not where we need to be yet as regards equality. We seek further understanding. We seek to understand what equality is, and we have, just recently, we're hearing more and more a new word, equity. Equality means that each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources necessary and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. Think about what Jesus did. When Jesus went around teaching to different places, he met the people where they were in their experience. It wasn't one size fits all. When he preached around the Sea of Galilee and taught there, he used parables and metaphors about fishing. When he was in the desert, it was about raising sheep and shepherding. When it was along the Jordan River, his teachings were based around farming. He met people where they were. He gave them what they needed to where they were so that they all could discover the divinity within themselves. The other great teachers did that as well. The Buddha, Gandhi, Martin Luther King. They spoke to each demographic in a language and with references that everyone could understand who heard them. It is said that Jesus could speak in many tongues. What he was speaking in was ways of speaking that people could hear. Not necessarily, although he did speak more than one language, but not necessarily just different languages, different ways of reaching people. Martin Luther King spoke in such a way that anyone who had ears to hear would get his message, and many did. We are all children of God, and we won't make that real until it is real for everybody. And as I said, we know the journey is not complete. And I believe that despite the appearances of the last decade, there are those in our world today that are living and working to fulfill the vision of Martin Luther King. I look at so many of our millennials, our younger generation, like my grandson, who have entirely different views of race and equity. I had a conversation a while back, actually it was a couple years ago now, and somebody in the group said, well, I'm colorblind, I don't see color at all. And one of the younger people, kids in the group said, there is no beauty in a colorblind world. And I thought, wow. Every understanding we reach, we discover that it is our diversity that creates beauty. It is our diversity that feeds us. I remember when the 7 years we lived in Joplin, Novella and I took a trip to Kansas City one afternoon, and we were walking down the street, and I was hearing conversations in Spanish, in French, there were multiple languages. And I realized, you know what I am missing? Is hearing other languages and seeing people of other cultures and other places. Because there is beauty. And together, that beauty in each one creates a tapestry. There's an old Unity song called Weave Us Together. We are every color. Todd knows it. We are every texture. But by itself, there is no unity. There is no beauty. Every time we come into a higher realization, we suggest to ourselves new truth ideas. And so we continually grow in our understanding, to be more open to God in mind, heart, and to receive newer and finer ideas, and to know and express the blessing that every human being is a blessing to every human being, exactly as they are, exactly as we are. I read one time in a Unity book, I don't remember which one, but I remember the passage. Every particle in the universe is indissolubly, that's a hard word to say, linked to every other particle. If we interfere with the communication between the particles, we cut ourselves off from the very source of existence. And what is true for the particles is true for the particles that join together to be you and me and every other person on earth. We are one. So when we have that understanding, we begin to catch that vision that we are many colors, many textures, but we are one. Where do we go with it? What do we do with this vision? What do we do with the dreams? What do we do with the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King? How do we continue his work? In unity, though we may not have all of the answers, our commitment and our calling is and will be to help and to serve, to provide a platform for the voices of change to be heard, to create a safe container that is steeped in unity principles, and to teach one another how to express that in our communities. Some of the ways we do that is we learn to listen deeply. But here's some things we don't often think about. Do we know how to grieve together? Do we really know how to pray together? To connect with empathy? To have dialogue, to share information, and to lift the consciousness and the conversation? We are working on that. We have classes coming up that are going to be about listening and speaking. How do we learn to listen and really hear each other? How can we say words that are empowering and supportive and uplifting? On a more practical scale, our headquarters, Unity Worldwide Ministry, has created the Standing Together Resource Center. And a few years back made the DEIJ position a permanent part of their board. Now, DEIJ stands for, help me out with this, Ethics, Inclusivity, Justice, and the D went right out of my head. Diversity, thank you. Our region now has a DEIJ representative on our board, expert. And if there's anyone in the congregation who has experience or credentials in that area, I would love to talk to you about how we can learn more about that. But in closing, I'm going to share some more of Dr. Martin Luther King's lecture with you. He said, "Every man lives in two realms, the internal and the external. The internal is that realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by which we live. Our problem today, and it's still true, is that we have allowed the internal to become lost in the external. We have allowed the means by which we live to outdistance the ends for which we live. So much of modern life can be summarized in that arresting dictum of the poet Thoreau: improved means to an unimproved end. This is the serious predicament, the deep and haunting problem confronting modern man. If we are to survive today, our moral and spiritual lag must be eliminated. Enlarged material powers spell enlarged peril if there is not proportionate growth of the soul. When the without of man's nature subjugates the within, dark storm clouds begin to gather in the world. All that I have said boils down to the point of affirming that mankind's spiritual survival is dependent on man's ability to solve the problems of racial injustice, poverty, and war. The solution of those problems is in turn dependent on us squaring our moral progress with our scientific progress and learning the practical art of living in harmony. Some years ago, a famous novelist died, and among his papers was found a list of suggested story plots, the most prominently underscored being this one. A widely separated family inherits a house in which they have to live together. This is the great problem of mankind. We have inherited a big house, a great big world house, in which we have to live together. Black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentiles and Jews, Catholics and Protestants, Muslims and Hindus. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interests who, because we can never again live without each other, must somehow, in this one big world, live with each other. Let us hope that the Spirit will become the order of the day. As Arnold Toynbee says, love is the ultimate force that makes for the saving choice of life and good against the damning choice of death and evil. Therefore, the first hope in our inventory must be the hope that love is going to have the last word. And this next one, I think, is important today. We can no longer afford to worship the God of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. The oceans of history are made turbulent by the ever-rising tides of hate. History is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals. that pursued this self-defeating path. Love is the key to the solution of the problems of the world. So let us love one another, for love is of God. And everyone that loves is born of God and knows God. Those that love not God. For God dwells in us, and his love is perfected in us. In memory of Martin Luther King, let us look at one another, not just in this room, but on the streets, on our TV screens, anywhere and everywhere. Let us look with one another with that love, that compassion, that understanding, and let us see the light that is every human being. Happy Martin Luther King Day.
Please hold for technical difficulties.
It's not working? There we go.
Ah.
Okay. All right. You guys.
One man come in the name of love. One man come and go. One man come, he to justify. One man to overthrow. In the name of love. What more in the name of love? In the name of love. What more in the name of love? One man caught on a barbed wire fence. One man he resists. One man washed up on an empty beach. One man betrayed with a kiss. In the name of love. What more in the name of love? In the name of love. What more in the name of love? Early morning, April 4, shots ring out in the Memphis sky.